The door slammed behind me, shaking the walls of my tiny apartment. My heart was still pounding from the argument with Sarah. Her words echoed in my head, "I just don't love you anymore, Mark. It's over." I stood there numb, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The reality of it all was like a punch in the gut. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. The cold metal of the cap bit into my fingers as I twisted it off and took a long swig. How could she just walk away after 3 years? It didn't make sense. I leaned against the counter, staring at the floor, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. I could still hear her voice, see the look in her eyes when she said it. There was no anger, just emptiness. A knock on the door startled me, snapping me out of my thoughts. I wasn't in the mood for visitors, but the knocking persisted, gentle yet firm. "Mark, it's Alex from next door." I heard some noise. "You okay?" I hesitated, then sighed. Alex had always been a decent guy, and honestly I wasn't sure I wanted to be alone right now. I shuffled over to the door and cracked it open. There he was, concern etched on his face. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, "you look like you've had a rough night. Want some company?" I almost said no, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him in. "Yeah, sure, beer's in the fridge." He nodded and made his way to the kitchen, while I sank onto the couch, trying to push Sarah out of my mind. Alex returned with 2 beers, handing one to me before sitting down. "So what happened?" he asked, not pushing too hard, just enough to show he cared. "Sarah," I muttered, taking another gulp of beer. "She ended it. Said she doesn't love me anymore." Alex winced. "Man, that's tough." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, well, what can you do?" I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. Alex didn't say anything, just nodded and took a sip of his beer. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge. It was strange, but just having him there made the pain a little less sharp. "Let's not talk about it," I finally said. "Can we just watch the game or something?" "Sure," Alex replied, reaching for the remote. The TV flickered on, filling the room with the familiar sounds of sports commentary. As we watched, I found myself relaxing, if only a little. The weight in my chest was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. Maybe it was the beer, or maybe it was just Alex's quiet presence. Either way, I was grateful. The game droned on in the background, but my mind wasn't on the screen. I kept stealing glances at Alex, sitting there so casually on my couch, as if he belonged. He noticed me looking and gave me a small smile, one that said he understood more than I was letting on. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," he said, eyes still on the TV, "but I'm here if you do." I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak just yet. The beer in my hand felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to as the room spun with too many emotions I wasn't ready to face. But Alex didn't push. He just sat there, sipping his beer, giving me the space I didn't know I needed. Minutes passed, maybe more, before he finally broke the silence again. "You know, I've been through a breakup or two," he said, his tone light like he was talking about the weather. "Not that it makes this any easier, but it helps to know you're not alone." I looked at him, really looked at him this time. There was something in his voice, something that felt genuine, like he wasn't just saying it to make me feel better. "Yeah," I asked, surprised by how hoarse my voice sounded. "Yeah," he nodded, turning his head to meet my eyes. "It sucks, no two ways about it. But you get through it, and sometimes you come out better on the other side." I let out a bitter laugh. Not sure how much better I'm going to be after this. He didn't argue, just leaned back and took another sip of his beer. Maybe not right away, he admitted, but eventually. You just need some time. And friends to help you through. Friends. The word hung in the air between us. I'd always thought of Alex as a good neighbor, maybe even a buddy, but friends? That felt like a stretch. Yet here he was, sitting with me in the middle of my mess, not asking for anything, just being there. "Thanks," I said quietly, my throat tightening up. It was all I could manage, but from the way Alex smiled, it was enough. Anytime, he replied, and I believed him. The game went on, forgotten by both of us as the night deepened. The awkwardness I'd felt earlier started to fade, replaced by something else, something that felt a lot like trust. For the first time since Sarah had walked out, I didn't feel so completely, utterly alone. Alex glanced at the nearly empty beer bottles on the coffee table and stood up. "How about we grab another one and make a toast?" to surviving shitty breakups. I cracked a smile despite myself. Yeah, why not? We clinked our bottles together, and for the first time all night, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'd get through this after all, and maybe Alex would be there to help me do it. We settled back on the couch, fresh beers in hand, the clink of the bottles still echoing faintly in the room. Alex leaned back, his arm casually draped over the back of the couch, close but not too close. It was the kind of relaxed posture that made it easy to forget the tension still knotted in my chest. The game flickered on the screen, but I wasn't watching. My mind was swirling, trying to make sense of everything. Sarah was gone, and here I was, sitting with Alex, who seemed to know exactly when to talk and when to just sit quietly. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was the kind that let me breathe, even with all the chaos in my head. Ever think about just starting over? Alex asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the thoughts in my head. He wasn't looking at me, just staring at the TV, but I could tell he wasn't really watching the game either. Starting over, I echoed, unsure where he was going with this. Yeah, he said, glancing at me briefly. You know, sometimes things fall apart, and you're left wondering what the hell you're supposed to do next. But maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's a chance to figure out what you really want. I snorted, shaking my head. I don't even know what that is anymore. Maybe that's okay, Alex said, his tone gentle but firm. Maybe this is your chance to figure it out. I took a long drink of my beer, letting his words sink in. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about it, what came next, how I was supposed to move on, but everything still felt so raw, so immediate. The idea of starting over, of finding something new, was almost too much to think about. But Alex wasn't pushing, just offering an idea, a different way to look at things, and for some reason it didn't sound so crazy coming from him. You make it sound so easy, I muttered, setting my bottle down on the coffee table. Not easy, Alex corrected, finally turning to look at me, but possible. And maybe a little easier with the right people around. I met his gaze, feeling a warmth there that I hadn't expected. There was something about Alex that made the weight on my chest feel a little lighter, like maybe I didn't have to carry it all by myself. Yeah, maybe, I said, my voice softer now. Thanks, Alex. He just nodded, his eyes lingering on mine for a moment longer before he turned back to the TV. The game continued, but we didn't really pay attention. The silence between us was comfortable, familiar now, and as the night wore on, I found myself leaning into it, letting the tension in my shoulders ease just a bit more. Alex was right. Maybe this was a chance to figure things out. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. And as the minutes turned into hours, I realized I didn't mind having him here, not at all. The game eventually faded into the background, just a blur of movement and noise on the screen. The more time I spent with Alex, the more I noticed things I hadn't before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the easy way he carried himself, like he was always comfortable in his own skin, it was disarming, to say the least. I took another swig of beer, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me. It wasn't just the warmth of the alcohol buzzing in my veins. No, this was different, something I hadn't expected, something I didn't know how to deal with. Alex caught me looking at him again, and this time he didn't ignore it. Instead, he turned to me, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. You've been quiet for a while, he said, his voice low, almost teasing. What's going on in that head of yours? I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I didn't even know what was going on in my head, let alone how to explain it to him. Just thinking, I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. About, he pressed gently, his tone inviting me to share without pushing too hard. I shrugged, trying to play it off. Everything, nothing. I don't know, man. But Alex didn't buy it. He shifted closer, just a little, enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. It was strangely comforting, but also something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. You know, he began, his voice soft but steady, it's okay to feel messed up after everything that's happened. No one expects you to have it all figured out. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The truth was, I didn't have anything figured out, not my feelings about Sarah, not my life, and definitely not the way I was suddenly noticing things about Alex that I'd never noticed before. And then it hit me. I wasn't just noticing these things, I was drawn to them. To him. The realization was like a jolt, sending a shockwave through me. I tried to push it down, ignore it, but it was too late. The thought was there, undeniable and terrifying. Alex must have sensed the shift in me because his smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Mark," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "whatever it is, you can talk to me. You know that, right?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I wanted to tell him, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stared at him, my mind racing. He was so close, closer than I'd realized, and for the first time I noticed how his eyes weren't just brown, they were warm, inviting, like they could see right through me. "You're staring," he said softly, amusement flickering in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something that made my heart skip a beat. "Sorry," I blurted out, feeling my face heat up. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," he interrupted, his voice still calm, but there was a new intensity in his gaze. "I don't mind." The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I was hyper-aware of everything, the way his leg was just inches from mine, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his lips curved ever so slightly. It was overwhelming, confusing, and yet I couldn't bring myself to pull away. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, charged with something that hadn't been there before. And then, almost imperceptibly, Alex leaned in, just a fraction closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt my breath hitch, my pulse quicken. This wasn't just friendly concern anymore, this was something else entirely. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but something I couldn't ignore either. The seconds stretched out, and I found myself leaning in too, drawn to him in a way that defied everything I thought I knew about myself. But just before anything could happen, I pulled back, breaking the spell. I should go," I stammered, standing up too quickly. The room spun, and I had to grab onto the back of the couch to steady myself. Alex watched me, his expression unreadable, but he didn't try to stop me. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, and I could hear the disappointment laced in his voice. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound more certain than I felt. "I just need some air." He nodded, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Okay, but Mark, if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here." I gave him a quick nod and made for the door, my heart pounding. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed between us, something that couldn't be undone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alex's eyes, the way he'd leaned in, the way my heart had raced like I was about to do something crazy. But I didn't, and now I couldn't stop thinking about it, about him. The next day dragged on, each hour stretching into the next, as I tried to go about my routine, tried to push the thoughts away. But it was useless. By evening, I found myself pacing in my apartment, staring at the wall that separated me from Alex's place. What was I supposed to do now? Pretend nothing happened? Pretend I didn't feel whatever it was I was feeling? Before I knew it, I was at his door, my fist hovering inches away, about to knock. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my ears. Was this a mistake? But before I could turn back, the door swung open, and there he was, looking just as surprised to see me. Mark, Alex's voice was a mix of curiosity and concern. "You okay?" I opened my mouth to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, feeling like an idiot for showing up without a plan. "Yeah, I don't know," I finally muttered, looking down at the floor. Alex stepped aside, silently inviting me in. I walked past him, my mind a whirl of confusion and nerves. He closed the door behind us, and the sound seemed to echo through the room, making the space between us feel even smaller. We stood there, a few feet apart, the tension from last night still hanging in the air. Alex broke the silence first, his voice soft. "You seemed pretty shaken up when you left. I've been worried about you." "I'm sorry," I blurted out, running a hand through my hair. "I didn't mean to freak out like that. It was a lot, you know." "I get it," he replied, his eyes searching mine. "You don't have to apologize. But I've been thinking too, and I just want to know, what happened last night between us?" The question hung there, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I had. I looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly, all the doubts, all the confusion melted away. There was something in the way he was looking at me, something patient, understanding, and maybe even hopeful. It was like he was waiting for me to make the next move. And before I could second-guess myself, I did. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and without thinking, I kissed him. It wasn't planned or thought out, it just happened, like the answer had been there all along, waiting for the right moment. For a split second, Alex froze, clearly caught off guard, but then he kissed me back, and everything else faded away. It was different from any kiss I'd ever had before, more intense, more electric. His stubble brushed against my skin, a sharp contrast to the softness of his lips. I could taste the faint hint of beer on his breath, feel the warmth of his hands as they settled on my waist, pulling me closer. My mind went blank, and all I could focus on was the way his lips moved against mine, the way my heart was pounding in my chest, the way everything just felt.
Right.
I deepened the kiss, feeling a spark of something I hadn't expected, something that both thrilled and terrified me at the same time. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes just yet, afraid that if I did, the moment would shatter. Mark, Alex whispered, his voice low and husky. Are you sure about this? I opened my eyes then, meeting his gaze, and for the first time I felt a sense of clarity. I don't know what I'm sure of, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I know I don't want to run away from this. From you. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. We'll figure it out, he said, his breath warm against my skin. Together. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. Whatever this was, whatever it meant, I wasn't alone in it. Alex was here, and that was enough for now. We stood there for a moment longer, our breaths mingling in the quiet of the room, before he gently pulled me towards the couch. Come on, he said, his tone lighter now. Let's sit down, take it slow, no need to rush anything. We sat side by side, close enough that our legs touched, the TV flickering in the background, forgotten. I didn't know what the next step was, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared to find out. The kiss had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, but with Alex beside me it felt less daunting. We sat on the couch, our knees brushing, neither of us saying much, just letting the silence settle comfortably between us. The TV murmured in the background, but we weren't paying attention to it. My mind was too focused on the way my heart raced every time Alex shifted closer. Mark, Alex said softly, breaking the silence. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can take this as slow as you need. I nodded, appreciating the way he could read the tension in me without making a big deal out of it. I know, I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. But I want this. I want to see where it goes. His eyes met mine, and there was something in them, something that made me feel like I was doing the right thing, even if it scared me. He smiled, and the warmth in it made my nerves settle just a bit. Then let's take it one step at a time, he said, his hand gently resting on my knee, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. That simple touch was enough to break down whatever walls I had left. Without overthinking it, I leaned in, pressing my lips to his again, more certain this time. The kiss was slower, deeper, filled with a mix of curiosity and newfound desire. I could feel the tension melting away as our mouths moved together, exploring, testing boundaries neither of us had acknowledged before. Alex's hands found their way to my shoulders, pulling me closer until I was practically in his lap. The heat between us was undeniable, and I found myself responding in ways that surprised me. My hands roamed over his back, feeling the muscles tense under my touch, the warmth of his skin through his shirt. It felt new, thrilling, and I couldn't get enough. He pulled back slightly, his breath heavy, his eyes searching mine. You sure, he asked again, giving me one last out. Instead of answering with words, I kissed him harder, my hands moving to his hair, pulling him closer. I didn't want to think anymore, I just wanted to feel. And Alex seemed to understand that perfectly. He guided me with a gentle confidence, his hands exploring my body in ways that made my pulse race, his lips trailing down my neck, sending shivers down my spine. Somewhere in the haze of desire, clothes started to come off, discarded carelessly as we moved from the couch to the bedroom. My thoughts were a blur, but my body knew exactly what it wanted, and Alex was more than willing to lead the way. The feel of his skin against mine was intoxicating, every touch igniting something inside me that I hadn't known was there. As we tumbled onto the bed, Alex took the lead, his hands and lips exploring every inch of me with a tenderness that took my breath away. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Every touch, every kiss, was like a revelation, opening me up to a world I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The night unfolded in a series of moments that blurred together soft gasps, whispered encouragements, and the feel of Alex's body moving against mine. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just an intense connection that neither of us wanted to break. When it was over, we lay there in the dark, our breathing slowing as the adrenaline began to fade. My head was spinning, not from confusion or doubt, but from the sheer intensity of what had just happened. I hadn't expected to feel this way, to be so sure of something so new, but there it was, undeniable and real. Alex's arm draped over my waist, pulling me close as he pressed a kiss to my shoulder. "You okay?" he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "Yeah," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Better than okay." He chuckled softly, the sound vibrating through me as he tightened his hold. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere, Mark. We'll figure this out together." I nodded, my eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion began to take over. Together I echoed, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the heat of our bodies. As I drifted off to sleep, wrapped in Alex's arms, I realized that this was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel alone. Whatever came next, I knew I wasn't facing it by myself, and that was more comforting than I could have ever imagined. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. I stirred awake, my head pounding slightly from the night before. For a moment, everything felt warm, comfortable until the memories of last night came crashing back. My eyes snapped open, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, Alex's arm still draped over my waist, his breath steady and warm against my neck. Panic started to rise in my chest, tightening my throat. What had I done? This wasn't just some casual hookup. I'd crossed a line I wasn't sure I could uncross. Carefully, I slipped out from under Alex's arm, trying not to wake him. My movements were slow, deliberate, as I gathered my clothes scattered across the floor. The more I dressed, the heavier the weight on my chest became. The events of last night replayed in my mind on a loop: the kiss, the way he touched me, the way I'd responded without hesitation. It was everything I thought I'd never feel, and it scared the hell out of me. Just as I was about to leave, Alex stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked a few times, trying to shake off sleep, and when he saw me standing there, half-dressed and clearly panicked, a frown creased his brow. Mark's voice was thick with sleep, but concern was evident in his tone. "What's going on? Why are you up so early?" I have to go," I stammered, avoiding his gaze as I pulled on my shoes, my fingers trembling. "Last night, I don't know, it was a mistake." The words tasted bitter on my tongue as soon as I said them, but I couldn't take them back. I saw the flash of hurt in Alex's eyes, quickly masked by a neutral expression, but I knew him well enough to see the pain beneath it. "A mistake," he echoed, sitting up slowly, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet hurt. "Mark, don't do this. Let's talk about it." "I can't," I blurted out, my voice cracking. I couldn't face him, couldn't face what I'd done, what it might mean. I don't know what I am, but I can't be this. I'm not gay, Alex. I've never been attracted to a guy before, and now this." Alex looked away, his jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. I could see him wrestling with his own emotions, trying to stay calm, trying to be the understanding friend I knew him to be. "It's okay," he finally said, though his voice was strained. "We don't have to label anything, Mark. We don't have to figure it all out right now. Just don't run away, please." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to stay, wanted to believe that we could figure this out together, but the fear was too strong. What if I couldn't? What if this wasn't me? "I'm sorry," I whispered, backing towards the door. I need to think." Alex didn't try to stop me. He just watched me go, his expression a mix of sadness and resignation. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "I'm here when you're ready." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak again. Then I turned and left, the door clicking softly behind me. Each step back to my apartment felt heavier than the last, the weight of what I'd just done settling in my chest like a stone. Inside my place, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The silence was deafening, my mind racing with 1,000 questions I didn't have answers to. What had I done? Who was I now? And most terrifying of all, what if I just ruined the best thing that had ever happened to me? But even as the panic surged, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that it wasn't over, that maybe this was just the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. I tried to silence that voice, to shove it down, but it persisted, nagging at the edges of my thoughts. I wasn't ready to face any of it, not yet. So I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to convince myself that leaving was the right thing to do. But deep down, I knew I was only lying to myself. Days passed in a blur. I buried myself in work, trying to drown out the noise in my head. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't escape the thoughts of Alex, the memory of that night, and the way I'd left things. Every time I walked past his door, my stomach twisted in knots, a mixture of guilt and longing pulling me in opposite directions. I tried to convince myself that it was better this way, that I needed space to figure out what I wanted, who I was, but the truth was, I was avoiding him because I didn't have the answers, and I was terrified of what those answers might be. One evening, after another long day of avoiding the inevitable, I found myself standing in front of Alex's door again. I hadn't planned to stop, but my feet had a mind of their own. The apartment felt too empty, too quiet, and despite everything, I missed him. The way he made me feel seen, understood, even when I didn't understand myself. Before I could talk myself out of it, I knocked. The sound echoed in the hallway, and I held my breath, waiting. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there he was, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "Mark," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Relief, maybe? I didn't expect to see you." "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice sounding more tentative than I wanted it to. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't keep running. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, letting me in. The familiar scent of his apartment hit me, bringing back a flood of memories, some comforting, some painful. We moved to the living room, the same spot where everything had changed just days ago. We sat down, the silence between us heavy, but this time it wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the kind filled with unspoken words, with things that needed to be said but were too hard to start. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, staring at my hands instead of at him. "About everything. About us." Alex didn't respond right away, just waited for me to continue, his patience only making the knot in my chest tighter. "I know I left things. Badly," I admitted, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "And I'm sorry for that. I was scared. I still am." He nodded, his eyes softening. But there was a sadness there too, one that made me wish I could take back the last few days. "I get it, Mark. This is a lot to take in, and I never wanted to pressure you." "I know," I said quickly, not wanting him to think I blamed him. "It's not your fault. None of this is. It's just, I don't know what to do with everything I'm feeling. I've never felt this way before, and it's messing with my head." "I can't tell you how to feel, or what to do," Alex said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I can tell you that what we have means something to me, and I think it means something to you too." He was right, of course. It did mean something more than I'd been willing to admit to myself. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. "It does," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure if I can be what you need, or what I need." Alex's face tightened, but he didn't look away. "You don't have to be anything right now, Mark. I just want you to be honest with yourself, with me." There it was, the heart of the matter. Honesty. And I realized that, despite everything, I hadn't been honest with myself, not fully. I'd been so caught up in what this meant, what I might be, that I hadn't allowed myself to just feel what I was feeling. "I'm scared, Alex," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know who I am anymore, and I'm scared of what that means for us." He reached out then, his hand covering mine, warm and steady. "It's okay to be scared, but you don't have to go through this alone." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the care, the concern, the affection in his eyes. And it hurt, because I knew I wasn't ready to give him what he deserved. "I don't want to hurt you," I whispered, the words thick with emotion. "But I'm not ready, and I don't know when I will be." His hand tightened on mine, but then he let go, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand," he said quietly, the pain in his voice cutting deep. "I won't push you, Mark, If you need time, take it. But just know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I nodded, knowing that this was goodbye, at least for now. "Thank you," I said, my voice choked. "For everything." He gave me a sad smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Mark, and don't be a stranger." I stood up, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. "I'll try," I said, even though I wasn't sure if I could keep that promise. With one last look, I turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind me. Every step back to my apartment felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind, but I knew it was what I had to do. I needed to figure things out, to find myself before I could be anything to anyone else. But as I sat alone in my apartment, the silence pressing in on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just let something important slip through my fingers, and that maybe, when I was ready, it would be too late to get it back. The days after leaving Alex's apartment felt like I was living in a fog. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, but everything seemed distant, like I was watching my life from outside my own body. I'd convinced myself that I needed this space to figure things out, but the truth was, the distance only made the questions louder, the doubts sharper. Every time I sat alone in my apartment, my thoughts would spiral. What did this mean? Who was I now? Was I even capable of feeling anything real? Or was I just grasping at straws in the middle of my confusion? I'd never questioned myself like this before, and the uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me feeling more lost than ever. I tried to talk myself out of it. I'd tell myself that maybe it was just the shock of everything, that maybe things would go back to normal if I just gave it time. But then I'd think of Alex's voice, his touch, the way he'd looked at me with such understanding and care, and the pit in my stomach would deepen. It wasn't just shock, and I knew it. I started avoiding the places we used to hang out, even taking different routes to avoid running into him. I wasn't ready to face him, not after everything I'd put him through. I knew he'd give me the space I asked for, but that didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. One night, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it, heart skipping a beat when I saw Alex's name on the screen. It wasn't a call, just a text, simple, straightforward. "Alex, hope you're doing okay. No pressure to reply, just wanted to check in." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My fingers itched to respond, to say something, anything, but I didn't know what to say. Was I okay? Not really. But how could I explain that when I didn't even understand it myself? Instead of replying, I set the phone down, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. Alex had always been there for me, even when I wasn't sure I deserved it. And now, here I was, pushing him away because I couldn't handle my own confusion. The days stretched into weeks, and the distance between us grew. I buried myself in work, in distractions, in anything that kept me from thinking too hard. But no matter how much I tried to drown it out, the questions wouldn't go away. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey in front of me. I poured myself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light as it filled the glass. I took a sip, the burn in my throat a welcome distraction from the chaos in my mind. But as the alcohol began to warm my veins, the thoughts I'd been trying to suppress bubbled to the surface. Was I really doing the right thing by staying away from Alex? Or was I just running from something I didn't want to face? I downed the rest of the drink and poured another, my mind replaying the last few months in excruciating detail. The breakup with Sarah, the nights with Alex, the way he'd made me feel like I wasn't completely falling apart. I thought I'd needed time to figure out who I was, but the more time I spent alone, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd already started to figure it out with him. The thought terrified me, but there was a small flicker of something else beneath the fear-hope, maybe. The idea that what I'd felt with Alex wasn't just some fluke, that it was real, and that it mattered. And that maybe, if I could get over my own fears, I could figure out what that meant. I stared at the half-empty glass in my hand, the amber liquid swirling as I turned it slowly. I was tired of running, tired of the constant uncertainty. But more than that, I was tired of feeling like I was missing out on something important, because I was too scared to face it. Setting the glass down, I picked up my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I typed out a response to Alex's text from weeks ago. Hey, I'm not sure if I'm okay, but I'm trying. Can we talk? I hesitated for only a second before hitting send. The message disappeared, and I sat back, the weight in my chest lifting just a little. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't going to run from it. I stared at the phone, waiting, hoping. A minute passed, then another, and just when I started to think I'd missed my chance, the screen lit up with a reply. Alex, of course. Anytime. And with that, I felt the smallest hint of relief. Maybe this wasn't over after all. Maybe I wasn't as lost as I'd thought. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to figure this out with him. The knock on my door came sooner than I expected. I'd barely had time to gather my thoughts after texting Alex before he was standing on the other side, a mix of hope and uncertainty in his eyes. I opened the door and let him in, my heart racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. We didn't say much as we made our way to the couch. The same couch where everything had started, where my world had shifted in ways I still didn't fully understand. Alex sat beside me, close but not too close, waiting for me to speak. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid, everything that still needed to be said. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I started, my voice low, steady, about what happened, about us. Alex nodded, his gaze never leaving mine, but he didn't interrupt. He was giving me space, letting me find the words at my own pace. I was scared, I admitted, my eyes flicking down to my hands before meeting his again. I still am. Everything about this, about you, it's new to me, and I didn't know how to handle it. I know, he said quietly, a hint of sadness in his voice. But you don't have to do this alone, Mark. I never wanted you to feel like you did. I know that now, I replied, feeling a mix of guilt and gratitude. And I'm sorry for how I reacted, for pushing you away. It wasn't fair to you. I was trying to figure things out, but I didn't realize that maybe I was pushing away the one person who could help me make sense of it all. His expression softened, and he reached out, his hand resting on mine. The warmth of his touch was familiar now, comforting, and I didn't pull away. You're here now, he said, his voice filled with quiet understanding. That's what matters. I took a deep breath, feeling the knot in my chest loosen just a bit. I don't have all the answers, I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. But I know that what I felt with you, it was real. It scared me, because it was so different from anything I've ever felt before, but it was real. Alex's eyes searched mine, and I could see the hope there, tempered by caution. So where do we go from here, he asked, his voice gentle, but there was a vulnerability in it that I hadn't heard before. I don't know, I said honestly. But I want to find out. I want to stop running and start figuring out what this is, what we could be together. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he squeezed my hand gently. We can take it one step at a time, he said, echoing the words he'd spoken to me before. There's no rush. We just have to be honest with each other. I can do that, I said, my voice more certain now. I want to do that. He leaned in slightly, his eyes softening as he studied my face. Are you sure, he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Instead of answering with words, I leaned in, closing the distance between us, and kissed him. It was different from the last time. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a sense of rightness, of belonging. His lips were warm, his touch gentle, and as the kiss deepened, I felt the last remnants of my doubts fade away. When we finally pulled apart, we were both smiling, a quiet understanding passing between us. We didn't need to say anything more, the kiss had said it all. This wasn't just about labels or definitions, it was about the connection we'd found, the way we made each other feel. Whatever this is, I said softly, my forehead resting against his, I want to figure it out with you. Me too, he replied, his voice full of quiet determination. We'll take it as it comes, together. We sat there for a while, wrapped up in each other, the world outside fading away. It wasn't perfect, and there were still so many things we needed to figure out, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what might come next. I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. With Alex by my side, I felt like I could face whatever came our way, one step at a time. And as we sat there holding each other close, I knew that this was just the beginning of something new, something that felt more right than anything I'd ever known.